On the next morning edition, the shrinking presidential field. Republicans reach out to Rand Paul supporters. Democrats hold a two-candidate town hall meeting. And the stress of being a chef in a top restaurant.
You're trying to not just maintain standards, but continue to raise standards at a restaurant that has such a storied history.
The chef's story on the next morning edition.
I'm Jack Lepios. The EPA's acting water chief is accusing Michigan officials of ignoring federal advice to treat water in Flint, Michigan last year. That at the first congressional hearing on the water crisis in Flint, which has dangerously high levels of lead. Michigan's top environmental regulator says there were mistakes made at all levels of government and says the EPA did not display the sense of urgency that the situation demanded. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is suspending his campaign for president. The 52-year-old says he's leading the race to focus on re-election to the Senate, that after getting less than 5% of the vote in Monday's Iowa caucuses. Ford is looking to cut hundreds of managerial jobs in Europe as it looks to improve low profit margins in the region. The company says the voluntary separation program is part of larger efforts to save $200 million a year. It will also phase out less profitable models. You're listening to Here and Now.
Join us every weekday morning starting at 5 for Morning Edition. Here and Now is made possible by your membership and by Ice Miller Indiana Week in Review, weekly listener and viewer poll. Listen every week for a new question and results from last week's poll. Find out how to participate at wfyi.org/IWIR. WFYI Radio is streaming. Find both 90.1 WFYI and HD to the Point at WFYI.org/listen.
Attention Roadshow fans, the one and only Antiques Roadshow is coming to Indianapolis July 9th. Apply for tickets now. To enter and see the complete list for Roadshow event tickets and the Roadshow Furniture Roundup, visit WFYI.org or call 888-762-3749. Ticket applications and furniture submissions must be received by April 18th. Tickets are awarded by a random drawing. Good luck.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston. Lumosity, offering a 10-minute fit test to challenge memory, attention, and problem solving with brain games to calculate baseline scores and build a brain training program. Performance can be compared with global averages. More at lumosity.com. And MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
It's Here and Now. Yesterday, the Senate Armed Services Committee explored the controversial notion of women signing up for the draft as men are required to do. It's not the first time the question has come up. The Supreme Court ruled in 1981 that women didn't have to join men in registering for military service. But now that the way has been cleared for women to participate in elite combat roles if they qualify, the National Coalition for Men is arguing that the draft requirement should change as well. NPR National Security Editor Philip Ewing is with us. Hi, Phil.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. And some people might remember the day, January 27th, 1973, when the Selective Service announced there would be no more draft calls. People wouldn't be called up, that the military could fulfill its obligations with just volunteers. But young men still have to register with their draft board for what? The possibility of switching back?
Yeah, that's right. The U.S. has maintained the Selective Service as kind of a last resort option in the case of a major war or some kind of big crisis. But Congress would have to act to declare war against the enemy and then probably reauthorize the use of Selective Service to call up young men to join the military. So this issue is more about politics and representation than it is about a practical national security issue right now.
Well, yesterday, two high-ranking generals testified it's time for women to be required to register for these future drafts. So what's the argument?
Well, General Robert Neller and General Mark Milley, they're the head of the Marine Corps and the Army, both say that because the Pentagon has opened every single job that it has to women, that's included in frontline infantry units, special operations forces, and others, women are as eligible as men for those opportunities, which means they should bear the same responsibilities as young men to sign up for the Selective Service. There's some support in Congress for entertaining that issue, but not a lot of clarity about which way it should go. And the Defense Department itself says it's studying this issue. Those are their personal positions. The Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, as far as we know, don't have an official recommendation to make about this yet.
Well, and others have testified that excluding women from the draft reinforces a negative stereotype that women somehow can't handle it. Representative Martha McSally, the Republican from Arizona, was the first woman to fly in combat, and she said yesterday, the debate is over, women are in combat. So how much is this recent decision to allow women to go into combat positions? And we know women have been in combat because there's no more front line, but these are going into elite combat positions if they're qualified. How much is that playing into all of this? Is this just generals saying, okay, you let them in combat, then they have to be drafted?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Pentagon has set the stage for this debate by saying after many years of separation within the services, that with that equality should come an equality of obligation on the part of selective service. That, again, is more political and theoretical because of how remote today the possibility is for there to be a draft and for young people to be called up to serve. But I think the advocates for changing this law would say we should do the work now, given these new opportunities for women, so that if, in fact, the United States did have to fall back on this crisis option, men and women would both be in a position to start to being called up.
The draft was hugely unpopular. A lot of people, when we kicked this around this morning, said, really, you have to draft? What do you have to do? And I know if you don't register for the draft, you're not eligible for federal financial aid, you can't work for the government, and you could face prison time or a $250,000 fine. But it was so unpopular. Is there a sense, were people arguing against this, arguing this is just symbolic and don't do this?
Yes, I think so, and that's what comes back to the politics and symbolism here. This is not something that is practically under consideration, and in fact, Congress considers a lot of these hot-button issues, including the president's request for an authorization for military force or the possibility of attacking the government in Syria, and just never acts. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if, in fact, this came up, there was some debate, but Congress never actually took a vote, just because, as you say, it's very unpopular, and no one wants to be out front on such an unpopular issue.
And we've got a lot of people talking about just what a draft was and what it meant. NPR's National Security Editor Philip Ewing, thank you.
Thank you.
There are currently 745 people on death row in California, one of 31 states where capital punishment is legal. Appeals for those on death row can take decades, and it's been a decade since California executed a death row inmate. Both supporters and opponents of the death penalty agree the system is broken, and come November, California voters may be able to consider two measures. One to limit appeals and speed up executions, the other to ban the death penalty and convert existing death sentences to life in prison without parole. Scott Schaefer of Here and Now contributor KQED in San Francisco reports.
A little over 5 years ago, Lieutenant Sam Robinson from the California Department of Corrections offered me a little tour of the new execution facility at San Quentin Prison.
What you're looking at, Scott, is our infusion control room.
A federal judge had problems with the old death chamber. Among other things, it was too dark. You couldn't see inside to tell if inmates were suffering during the lethal injection process.
That's actually where the execution team facilitates infusing the inmate with the lethal cocktail to facilitate an execution.
Price tag for the new execution chamber, nearly $1 million. Bright lights, big windows for witnesses to see through. But here's the crazy thing. The new chamber has never been used, and it might never be. In fact, in California, there's widespread belief that the death penalty doesn't work.
It's bad. It is not good. And that's the one side both the opponents of capital punishment and those of us that support it agree on.
That's Steve Wagstaff, San Mateo County's district attorney. He says since California reinstated the death penalty in 1978, his county has sent 15 people to death row. One was executed, 4 others died of natural causes. Wagstaff and other supporters of capital punishment are frustrated that death penalty appeals seem to take forever in California.
The last death penalty case that I prosecuted, the last one in our county, the jury returned a verdict and the sentence of death was in early 2010. It took almost 5 years just to get an attorney appointed with nothing happening in the meantime.
And that's pretty typical. There aren't enough lawyers willing to take on cases. The appeals are tedious and time-consuming, with low pay and not much chance of success. Wagstaff and his fellow district attorneys think voters should have a chance to fix it.
They're sponsoring a ballot measure to speed up the legal appeals process so executions would happen more quickly. At least that's the thinking. But opponents of capital punishment say the system is fundamentally broken and can't be fixed.
It's really a disservice to the people of the state to perpetuate something that not only doesn't work effectively, but really is irreparable.
Elizabeth Semmel runs the death penalty clinic at UC Berkeley's law school, where students work on behalf of death row inmates. Semmel says even if Californians vote to speed up executions, she doubts legislators and the governor would actually fork over the money it would take for lawyers to speed up the appeals.
The prospect of executing 745 people is illusory. So there will be a randomness to the number of people we execute in the state until we finally recognize that we're done with it.
Semmel and other death penalty critics say the system is such a mess, with so many legal problems, that it should just be scrapped. They support another measure that could be on the November ballot to do just that, get rid of capital punishment and convert all death sentences to life in prison with no chance of parole. Caught up in the middle of all this, death row inmates. 54-year-old Raymond Lewis murdered a friend over a drug deal. He's been on death row since 1991.
I feel that I should have a choice on whether I want to continue to live like this or to be executed. And I've asked to be executed by stopping my appeals, but my attorneys then refused to do so.
We're a state that has executed 13 people in the last 30 years out of a list of 750 that are waiting.
Mark Klass's 12-year-old daughter, Polly, was kidnapped and murdered in 1993. The man who did it has been sitting on death row for 20 years.
Something has to be done, and that's why I'm working with the DAs. I would like to see the death penalty system fixed.
The California Supreme Court spends about a third of its time reviewing death penalty appeals. Before he stepped down as Chief Justice, Ronald George caused a stir by noting that the leading cause of death on death row is old age. Now he says it's time to either fix California's death penalty or get rid of it.
I think one has to question whether we should really continue with a system that is dysfunctional. Something should be done in one direction or the other.
Californians might decide which direction to go this November. The voters are given a chance to choose between banning capital punishment and speeding up executions. For Here and Now, I'm Scott Schaefer.
Stay with us. It's Here and Now.
Wine, food, and fun. The WFYI Ice Miller Wine Fest returns March 4th to the Crown Plaza at Historic Union Station. An evening of fine wines, great food, and friends makes the perfect Valentine's gift for the wine lover you love. Visit WFYI.org/winefest and get your tickets now. The WFYI Ice Miller Wine Fest. Additional support from Conn's Fine Wines and Spirits, LHD Benefit Advisors, and GiveSmart.
Do you get swept away by your favorite British programs? Let WFYI and Transcendent Travel take you there with the To the Manor Born Tour of England. Visit the famous settings of Downton